There is a moment when you stand at the edge, the ground firm beneath your feet, the sky vast above your head, and before you, nothing. An expanse so profound it seems to pull at your very being. This is the abyss that Friedrich Nietzsche spoke of, not merely a physical chasm, but the vertiginous recognition of your own boundless freedom. He who fights with monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster, Nietzsche warned us. And if you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you. What did he mean by this reciprocal gaze? What happens when we confront the endless void of possibility, when we realize that the comforting structures that once held our world together have begun to crumble beneath our feet? Today we embark on a journey through the labyrinthine thoughts of one of philosophy's most misunderstood prophets. We will walk the narrow path between nihilism and meaning, between despair and creation. We will confront the death of God, the weight of freedom, and the dizzying responsibility of becoming who we are. This is not merely an academic exercise, for in Nietzsche's vision we glimpse our modern condition, unmoored from tradition, bewildered by possibility, and haunted by the suspicion that we alone must forge meaning from the formless clay of existence. Come, let us begin our descent. God is dead. God remains dead. And we have killed him. These words, perhaps Nietzsche's most famous, echo through the empty cathedral of modernity. But what did he mean by this pronouncement? Not a simple atheistic declaration, but something far more profound, a cultural diagnosis. For Nietzsche, writing in the late 19th century, the foundations of Western civilization were crumbling. The Enlightenment's razor of reason had severed the threads that bound us to the divine. Science had begun to explain what once seemed miraculous. The moral authority of religious institutions was weakening. The death of God was not an event, but a process, a slow recognition that the transcendent source of meaning, value, and purpose that had oriented human life for millennia was no longer credible for the modern mind. The absolute had become relative. The eternal had become historical. The sacred had become merely psychological. What did we do when we unchained this earth from its sun? Nietzsche asks through his madman in The Gay Science. Whither is it moving now? Whither are we moving? Away from all suns? Are we not plunging continually? Backward, sideward, forward in all directions? Is there still any up or down? This is the first glimpse of the abyss, the recognition that without God, without an absolute foundation, we float in infinite sea of possibility, with no intrinsic direction, no cosmic compass. The vertigo of this realization is not merely intellectual but existential. It is felt in the bones, in the pit of the stomach, in the quiet hours of the night when meaning itself seems to dissolve like mist. And yet Nietzsche did not mourn this death. He saw it as both catastrophe and opportunity, a necessary passage through darkness toward a more authentic light. For the death of God is also the birth of human freedom in its most radical form. The scaffolding falls away and we stand naked before the task of creating meaning rather than merely inheriting it. The question becomes, can we bear this freedom? Can we live in the aftermath of absolute values? Or will we rush to replace the dead God with new idols, the state, science, progress, consumption, anything to avoid the terrible responsibility of freedom? As the ground of traditional meaning gives way, we find ourselves suspended over an abyss. This is nihilism, the conviction that existence has no intrinsic meaning, value, or purpose. that our deepest beliefs are merely human constructions, contingent and arbitrary, floating like islands on a sea of chaos. Nihilism, wrote Nietzsche, represents the ultimate logical conclusion of our great values and ideals, because we must experience nihilism before we can find out what value these values really had. The abyss is not merely emptiness, it is a corrosive force that dissolves all certainties. It whispers that our moral convictions are merely cultural customs, that our sense of self is a narrative fiction, that our deepest hopes are childish fantasies. It suggests that beneath our desperate meaning-making lies nothing. This is the uncanniest of guests, as Nietzsche called it, the shadow that grows longer as the sun of God sets on the western horizon. And its arrival was not accidental, but inevitable, the product of our own commitment to truth, our own relentless questioning that eventually turned upon its own foundations. What if truth is so unbearable that we need lies to live? Nietzsche asks us. What if our will to truth, pushed far enough, reveals that truth itself is a human construction, one possible interpretation, among many with no privileged claim? Here we face a paradox. The very values that defined Western civilization, rational inquiry, the quest for truth, the devotion to progress, have undermined themselves. Our honesty has forced us to be honest about the groundlessness of our own position. The serpent of reason has swallowed its own tail. The danger in this moment is what Nietzsche called passive nihilism, a weariness of spirit, a collapse into meaninglessness, a surrender to the void. We see its symptoms all around us, in cynicism and ironic detachment, in mindless consumption, in the frantic pursuit of distraction, in the epidemic of despair that haunts affluent societies. What does nihilism mean? Nietzsche asks. That the highest values devaluate themselves. The aim is lacking. Why? Finds no answer. What does nihilism mean? Nietzsche asks. That the highest values devaluate themselves. The aim is lacking. Why? Finds no answer. Imagine this, Nietzsche proposes. A demon creeps into your loneliest loneliness and whispers that you must live this life exactly as you have lived it, with every pain, every joy, every moment of tedium and triumph, again and again for eternity. Every choice, every mistake, every fleeting thought made permanent in an endless recurrence. Would you not throw yourself down and gnash your teeth and curse the demon who spoke thus? Nietzsche asks. Or would you perhaps recognize this as the ultimate affirmation, the divine formula for saying yes to life in its totality? The eternal return is not a cosmological theory, but an existential thought experiment, a weight placed upon every moment. It asks, do you live in such a way that you could will the eternal repetition of your life? Could you embrace not just the mountain peaks of experience, but the valleys, not just your triumphs, but your failures, not just your certainties, but your contradictions? This is not a call to hedonism, but to something far more demanding, a radical affirmation of life that requires no metaphysical consolation, no promise of reward, no escape from the tragic dimension of existence. It demands that we love fate, amor fati, not merely accept it, that we embrace necessity as the soil from which our freedom grows. My formula for greatness in a human being, Nietzsche writes, is amor fati, that one wants nothing to be different, not forward, not backward, not in all eternity. Not merely bear what is necessary, but love it. The eternal return is Nietzsche's challenge to nihilism from within nihilism itself. If nothing has intrinsic meaning, if all values are human creations, then the ultimate creative act is to affirm life despite, or even because of, its groundlessness. To say yes to the whole chaotic, contradictory, terrifying and beautiful tapestry of existence. This is not meaning discovered, but meaning created, not through escaping the abyss, but through staring unflinchingly into it and recognizing our own reflection in its depths. What drives us toward this affirmation? What power within us resists the gravitational pull of nihilism? Nietzsche identifies this as the will to power, not merely power over others, but the fundamental drive to expand, to overcome resistance, to transform and be transformed. What is good? Nietzsche asks. All that heightens the feeling of power, the will to power, power itself in man. Not power as domination, but power as the capacity to shape oneself and one's world, the sculptor's power over marble, the dancer's power over movement, the thinker's power over concepts. The will to power manifests not just in conquest, but in creation. It is the artist confronting the blank canvas, the philosopher questioning inherited wisdom, the individual forging an authentic life against the pressures of conformity. For Nietzsche, all of life expresses this will, from the simplest organisms seeking nourishment to the highest acts of human creativity. It is neither good nor evil in itself, but the raw energy from which both spring. It can express itself as destruction or as creation, as domination or as self-overcoming. The critical question becomes, how shall we channel this will? Toward what shall we direct this fundamental creative force that pulses through our veins? In a world without transcendent guidance, the answer is not given but chosen. We are called to become artists of our own lives, legislators of our own values, navigators of our own course through the infinite sea of possibility. This is not a call to arbitrary choice, but to a new kind of necessity. The necessity that flows from the deepest currents of our being when we have the courage to swim against the stream of conventional wisdom, comfortable illusions, and inherited prejudices. The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe, Nietzsche observes. If you try it, you will be lonely often and sometimes frightened, but no price is too high to pay for the privilege of owning yourself. As we ascend from the abyss, transformed by our confrontation with nothingness, Nietzsche offers us a vision, not of what we are, but of what we might become. This is the Übermensch, often translated as Superman or Overman, but perhaps best understood as the one who overcomes, who transcends the human all too human through the alchemy of creative will. The Übermensch is not a biological evolution, but a spiritual one, not a master race, but a mastery of self. This figure stands as the counterpoint to both the last man, who seeks only comfort and security, and the vengeful spirit who turns resentment into a moral virtue. Man is something that shall be overcome, Nietzsche writes. What have you done to overcome him? The Übermensch is the horizon that draws us forward, not a final destination, but a perpetual becoming, the human being who has integrated shadow and light, who can dance on the edge of the abyss without falling, who can create values rather than merely inherit them. This is not a call to selfishness, but to a generosity that flows from abundance rather than need, from strength rather than weakness. The Übermensch gives meaning as the sun gives light, not because it serves some purpose, but because it is the expression of an overflowing energy, I teach you the Übermensch, says Zarathustra, Nietzsche's prophet. Man is a rope stretched between the animal and the Übermensch, a rope over an abyss. What is great in man is that he is a bridge and not a goal. We are the tightrope walkers, suspended between what we have been and what we might become. The abyss below is not our enemy, but our teacher. Its emptiness is not a final truth, but a necessary passage, the darkness from which new stars are born. As we complete our journey, we find ourselves on new terrain, beyond the old moral maps that divided the world into good and evil, beyond the comfort of absolute truths, beyond the need for cosmic validation of our existence. This is not an amoral position, but a recognition that morality itself has a history, a psychology, a genealogy that can be traced. Different moral systems have served different forms of life, different arrangements of the will to power. The slave morality of Christianity, with its emphasis on humility, compassion, and otherworldliness, inverted the master morality of classical antiquity, with its celebration of strength, beauty, and this worldly excellence. Nietzsche's critique is not that morality is false, but that it has forgotten its own origins in human creativity. It presents itself as discovered rather than invented, as eternal rather than historical, as divine command rather than human projection. The task is not to abandon morality, but to recognize ourselves as its authors, to move from being characters in a story written by others to being the writers of our own story. This requires what Nietzsche called a revaluation of all values, a critical examination of the moral frameworks we have inherited, and a creative reimagining of what might serve life rather than diminish it. There are no moral phenomena at all, only moral interpretations of phenomena, Nietzsche observes. This is not relativism, but perspectivism, a recognition that all knowing is from a particular vantage point, shaped by particular interests, values, and needs. There is no view from nowhere, or no God's eye perspective that would give us absolute truth. And yet this does not mean all perspectives are equal. Some serve life, creativity, and growth. Others express exhaustion, resentment, and decline. The question becomes which interpretations enhance our power to create, to affirm, to embrace the full spectrum of human experience. We stand now at the edge again, but with new eyes. The abyss remains, infinite, mysterious, terrifying in its freedom. But we are no longer paralyzed by its gaze. We have learned to dance on its edge, to weave meaning from its emptiness, to find in its depths the reflection of our own creative power. This is Nietzsche's gift to us, not a system or a doctrine, but a challenge, not answers, but better questions, not comfort, but the courage to live without cosmic guarantees. I am not a man, Nietzsche once wrote. I am dynamite. His thought explodes the comfortable illusions that shield us from the raw truth of existence. But from this devastation emerges the possibility of authentic creation, of values that serve life rather than deny it, of meanings that empower rather than constrain, of a yes-saying that encompasses both joy and suffering. The conversation continues. Each generation must confront its own abyss, must find its own way of creating meaning in the aftermath of old certainties. Nietzsche does not offer us a map, but teaches us to become cartographers of the unmapped territory of future values. And perhaps this is wisdom. Not to seek final answers, but to remain in the question. Not to arrive at a destination, but to honor the journey, not to escape the abyss, but to make it fertile ground for new growth. For when you have gazed long enough into the abyss, you may discover that its emptiness is not the absence of meaning, but its precondition, the open space in which human freedom unfolds its most daring creations. We should consider every day lost, Nietzsche reminds us, on which we have not danced at least once. So let us dance on the edge of the abyss, under the stars of a universe indifferent to our fate, to the music of our own making. For in this dance we become what we are, the creators of meaning, the affirmers of life, the bridge between what has been and what might yet be.